You're watching your savings evaporate. Inflation, they said was transitory, is now permanent. Your grocery bill doubled. Your rent increased 40%. Every politician promises solutions, more stimulus, more regulation, more intervention. And deep in your gut, they're lying, or worse, they actually believe their own nonsense. So you heard about Ludwig von Mises. You heard he predicted the Great Depression, that he explained why socialism must fail. Decades before the Soviet collapse, prove him right, that he built an economic framework so logically airtight, so empirically validated by history, that once you understand it, you can never be fooled by political rhetoric again. You're ready to dive in. You want that clarity, that intellectual sovereignty. But here's the problem. Mises wrote 25 books, thousands of pages, 6 decades of work, and everyone gives you different advice. Academics say start with human action. That's 900 pages of systematic economic theory that assumes you already understand praxeology, marginal utility, and time preference. Reddit Austrians say read the theory of money and credit, published in 1912, academic density that makes your eyes glaze over by page 30. Meanwhile, your 401k is getting destroyed. The Fed just announced another policy shift. You need to understand now whether to refinance, whether that job offer makes sense given inflation, whether your kid's college fund strategy is even coherent in this economic insanity. How do you learn Mises when you're drowning in economic confusion? You have a full-time job, a family, responsibilities, and every week some new crisis demands you understand monetary policy, trade theory, labor economics, business cycle theory. Here's the truth nobody tells you. Most people start with the wrong Mises book, get overwhelmed, and quit. They never get the transformation. They stay trapped in economic confusion while the world burns. I'm about to solve that problem for you, not with theory about what you should read if you had infinite time and a PhD, but with the 3 specific Mises books that will transform your understanding fastest, in a precise order that builds knowledge the way a master teacher would. I know the frustration. You're intellectually serious. You don't want pop economics or dumbed-down summaries. You want the real Mises, the uncompromising logic, the systematic framework, the principles that explain everything. But you also have a life. You need efficiency. You need the path of maximum understanding with minimum wasted time. Here's what I'm giving you. The 3 books, in a precise order, that take you from economic confusion to Misesian clarity in months, not years. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which book to start tonight, which one builds on that foundation, and which masterwork you'll be ready for once you got the framework. This isn't just a reading list. It's the fastest path to intellectual freedom in economics. If you're serious about understanding the economic chaos destroying your future, subscribe to this channel. We cut through the nonsense with Mises, Hayek, Sowell, thinkers who actually explain reality instead of peddling comfortable lies. Now, let's be honest about what happens to most people who try to read Mises. They hear human action is the masterwork, the comprehensive treatise, all of economics rebuilt from first principles. So they order the 900-page hardcover, crack it open with genuine excitement, and hit this on page 1. Human action is purposeful behavior. Or we may say, action is what put into operation and transformed into an agency, is aiming at ends and goals, is the ego's meaningful response to stimuli and to conditions of its environment, is a person's conscious adjustment to the state of the universe that determines his life. Now, if you've already studied praxeology, understand methodological individualism, and grasp the difference between praxeological and psychological analysis, that sentence is beautiful, crystal clear, the foundation of everything that follows. But if you're coming straight from CNBC and Bloomberg, where economics means watching stock tickers and listening to Fed chair press conferences, that sentence is impenetrable. You have no framework to receive it. So what happens? You push through. You're determined. By page 100, you've encountered concepts like ordinal utility, catalactics, time preference, Originary interests, all crucial, all logically connected, but introduced at a pace that assumes you're already thinking like an Austrian economist. By page 200, you're exhausted. You feel stupid. You close the book. You think, maybe I'm just not smart enough for this. And Mises loses another student who was so close to understanding because they started with a comprehensive system before they had conceptual foundation to receive it. Here's what Mises himself knew: pedagogy matters. He didn't just write massive treatises. He gave lectures. He wrote accessible essays. He crafted shorter works specifically designed to introduce people to Austrian thinking. You know what Mises would tell you if you walked into his NYU seminar in 1950 having never studied economics? He wouldn't hand you human action and say, good luck. He'd start with accessible ideas, real-world applications, the logic that makes socialism impossible, the explanation of why inflation isn't about greed, but about money printing. He'd build your understanding systematically, not because he was dumbing things down, but because that's how teaching works. You can't build a third floor before you've poured the foundation. The tragedy is that most Mises reading lists ignore this pedagogical reality. They're built by academics who've already spent years studying Austrian economics for other academics. They're not built for you. The intelligent person with zero economics background who needs to understand now why everything's falling apart. So here's what I'm giving you instead. The 3-book path Mises himself would recommend if he met you today, not the path for PhD candidates. The path for real people living through economic insanity who need clarity fast. You ready? Let's start where Mises would start with you. This is where you start, not human action, not the theory of money and credit. Right here, economic policy, thoughts for today and tomorrow. This book is only 100 pages. You can read it in one weekend, and it will transform how you see economics forever. Here's the origin story. In 1958, Mises gave 6 lectures in Argentina, not academic papers, not systematic treatises, lectures to ordinary people who were watching their economy collapse under interventionist policies, business owners, workers, students, people who needed to understand what was happening to them. Mises knew his audience. He didn't start with epistemological foundations or praxeological axioms. He started with their reality. Why is capitalism blamed for poverty when capitalism eliminated poverty? Why do politicians promise that interventionism will fix problems that interventionism created? The genius of this book is that Mises covers all the core concepts: capitalism versus socialism, interventionism, inflation, foreign investment, politics, and ideas, using crystal clear everyday language with real historical examples. Listen to how he explains inflation. No jargon, just logic. Inflation is an increase in the quantity of money without a corresponding increase in the demand for money. If the government prints money and pumps it into the economy, prices rise. That's not corporate greed. That's not supply chain issues. That's simple math. More money chasing the same goods. Boom! You just understood inflation better than 90% of economics graduates. Or his explanation of why interventionism always fails. Government fixes prices below market level to help consumers. Result? Shortages. So government must now ration. Rationing requires bureaucracy. Bureaucracy requires more control. Each intervention creates the crisis that justifies the next intervention. That's why interventionism always marches toward full socialism. It can't stop halfway. See what just happened? In 3 sentences, Mises explained the entire logic of the interventionist spiral. Why rent control creates housing shortages. Why minimum wage creates unemployment. Why price controls create black markets. Why a little bit of socialism is logically impossible. This is the book that gives you the Misesian lens, the framework for seeing through economic nonsense. When Biden blames inflation on Putin or corporate greed, you'll instantly recognize a lie. When Trump promises tariffs will bring back jobs, you'll see why that raises prices. When progressives demand rent control, you will predict exactly what happens next. And here's what's beautiful. Economic policy doesn't give you the full systematic theory. It gives you something more immediately powerful, the applied logic, the real-world demonstration that Mises' principles aren't abstract philosophy. They're how reality actually works. You'll finish this book in a weekend. And Monday morning, when you read the news, everything will look different. You won't be confused anymore. You won't wonder why policies fail. You'll know with logical certainty, because Mises showed you the underlying principles. Start here, this weekend. 100 pages that change everything. But here's what happens next. You finish economic policy, and suddenly you have questions. Wait, if socialism must fail because of the calculation problem, what exactly is that calculation problem? How did Mises prove it? And what about democratic socialism or market socialism? Are those different? You're ready for depth. You want the full logical proof, not just the accessible explanation. Perfect. That means you're ready for book number 2. Now we go deep. Socialism, an economic and sociological analysis, is where Mises builds a foundation that explains why capitalism works and socialism cannot. This book, published in 1922, contains the most devastating critique of socialism ever written. Not emotional, not political, purely logical. And history proved every single prediction correct. If you're loving this deep dive into Mises' most important works, hit that like button so more people discover the reading path that actually works. And comment below, which book are you starting with? Here's what makes this book essential. Economic policy told you that socialism fails. Socialism shows you why it must fail, with such logical precision that once you grasp it, you can never be seduced by socialist promises again. The core argument is the economic calculation problem. Let me walk you through Mises' logic step by step. In capitalism, prices emerge from voluntary exchange. When you buy bread for $3, that price contains information about wheat supply, baker costs, consumer demand, alternative uses of resources. Millions of transactions create millions of prices that guide economic coordination without central planning. Entrepreneurs see, bread sells for $3, but I can make it for $2. They enter the market. Competition drives prices toward costs. Resources flow to their most valued uses. Not because anyone planned it, but because prices coordinate dispersed knowledge. Now, socialism abolishes private property in means of production. No private ownership means no buying and selling of capital goods. No buying and selling means no prices for capital goods. No prices means no way to calculate whether using steel for cars or trains or buildings creates more value. Mises writes, without economic calculation, there can be no economy. Every single step that takes us away from private ownership of the means of production and from the use of money also takes us away from rational economics. You see the logic? It's not socialism is bad because I don't like it. It's socialism is logically impossible because without prices, you cannot rationally allocate resources. The socialist planner faces infinite complexity. Should factory A produce 10,000 units with method X or 12,000 units with method Y? Should steel go to cars or bridges or hospitals? Which technology deserves investment? Without prices reflecting real scarcity and real preferences, every decision is a guess. Mises proved this in 1920. Socialists spent the next 70 years trying to refute him. Market socialism, computer planning, labor vouchers. Every attempt failed. Why? Because Mises was logically correct. You can't calculate value without prices. You can't have prices without private property. Therefore, socialism cannot work. But socialism doesn't stop with economics. Mises analyzes the sociological implications, how socialism destroys family, how it requires authoritarianism, how it eliminates art and culture, how the promise of equality delivers universal poverty. The chapters on socialist community, marriage, and education are chilling. Because Mises describes in 1922 exactly what happened in USSR, China, Cuba. Not because he was clairvoyant, because he understood the logical necessities of the socialist system. Reading Socialism in 2024 is surreal. Democratic socialists promise we'll do it differently this time. Mises already explained 100 years ago why different methods don't matter. The problem isn't implementation. It's the fundamental impossibility of economic calculation without private property. This book is 500 pages, significantly longer than economic policy, more dense, more systematic. But if you've already absorbed the accessible introduction, you're ready for this depth. Mises builds the argument brick by logical brick. When you finish, you won't just know socialism fails. You'll understand why it must, with such clarity that no socialist rhetoric can confuse you again. Fair warning, this book will make you angry. You'll recognize the lies you were taught in school, the romanticized nonsense about socialist equality, the historical crimes justified by utopian promises. But anger channeled into understanding becomes power. Read Socialism. Understand the calculation problem. You'll never be confused about economics again. And then, only then, you're ready for the masterwork. You've read economic policy. You have the Misesian lens. You've read Socialism. You understand why central planning fails and capitalism works. You've seen the applications. You've grasped the core logic. Now you're ready for Human Action, the comprehensive systematic treatise that rebuilds all of economic science from first principles. This is Mises' magnum opus. Published in 1949, revised through 4 editions. 900 pages of rigorous logical deduction that constructs the entire edifice of economic theory, starting from one axiom. Humans act purposefully. Everything, and I mean everything, follows from that. Value theory, price formation, money, interest, capital, business cycles, monopoly, government intervention, international trade, all derived through pure logical reasoning from the undeniable fact that humans choose means to achieve ends. Here's why you couldn't start with Human Action. It's not a book about applications or current events. It's a book about the logical structure of economic reasoning itself. Mises is rebuilding economics from the foundation, which means questioning every assumption, rigorously defining every term, and constructing every principle through explicit logical deduction. Part 1 establishes praxeology, the science of human action. You'll learn why economic laws are logical truths, not empirical hypotheses. Why you can't test them with statistics. Why they're more certain than any natural science law, because they're grounded in the undeniable reality of purposeful behavior. This is dense. This is abstract. But because you've already seen these principles work in economic policy and socialism, you can handle the theoretical foundation. You're not wondering, does this matter? You know it matters. You've seen it explain reality. Now you're learning why it explains reality. Part 2 through 7 systematically build how voluntary exchange creates prices, how time preference determines interest rates, how entrepreneurial profit and loss coordinate production, how money emerges and what inflation destroys, how capital accumulation creates prosperity, how interventionism disrupts coordination. Every chapter is a logical proof. Mises doesn't appeal to data or history, though he uses examples for illustration. He shows you why these principles must be true, why they follow necessarily from the nature of human action. Here's what happens when you read Human Action after the foundation. Concepts that would have been opaque become obvious. Originary interest you get immediately because you already understand time preference from socialism. Catalactics makes perfect sense because you've seen how market exchange works in economic policy. You're not struggling with vocabulary and concepts simultaneously. You're deepening understanding you already have. You're seeing the full systematic architecture that supports the applications you've been using, and the scope is breathtaking. Mises addresses everything: labor unions, monopoly, cartels, foreign investment, currency controls, monetary policy, fiscal policy, business cycles, war, nationalism, socialism, interventionism, capitalism, freedom, civilization itself. That by the time you finish part 7, the place of economics in society, you don't just understand economics. You understand how economic science relates to philosophy, history, epistemology, ethics. You see the complete Misesian worldview, fair expectation setting. Human action will take you months, maybe a year, if you read carefully and think through every argument. This isn't a weekend book, but that's okay, because you've already got the practical framework from books 1 and 2. You can use Misesian economics while you're mastering Misesian theory. Think of it like this. Economic policy taught you to play chess. Socialism explained why certain strategies work. Human action reveals a complete theory of game strategy. Every principle, every proof, every implication. You don't need the complete theory to play. But mastering the theory transforms you from competent player to grandmaster. Read human action. Slowly, carefully, with a notebook. When you finish, and you will finish, because you built a foundation, you will possess something rare. Complete systematic understanding of economic science. Nobody can fool you. No politicien, no economist, no journalist, no activist. You'll see through every fallacy, every manipulation, every well-intentioned policy disaster. That's intellectual sovereignty. That's what these 3 books, in this order, give you. Now you got the 3 books. Let's talk about how to read them, because Mises isn't beach reading. This requires a strategy. For economic policy, 100 pages, 1 to 2 weeks. Read it straight through first. Don't take notes yet. Just absorb the logic and examples. Mises' writing is clear. Let it wash over you. When you finish, you'll have the basic framework in your mind. Then reread it, this time with a notebook. After each lecture, write, main principle explained and real-world example I recognize from this principle. For instance, after the inflation lecture, you might write, principle, inflation is monetary expansion. Example, 2020 to 2023 money printing leads to current price surge. This cements a connection between Mises' logic and your reality. You're not learning abstract theory. You're learning to see economic reality clearly. One more thing. Read the news while reading economic policy. Seriously, every political promise, every policy announcement, every economic headline, filter it through what Mises just taught you. You'll be shocked how obvious the fallacies become. For socialism, 500 pages, 2 to 3 months. This requires more time and focus. Set a sustainable pace, maybe 15 to 20 pages per day. That's 30 to 40 minutes of concentrated reading. In 4 weeks, you're done. Here's the key. Socialism is argumentative. Mises is systematically demolishing socialist arguments one by one. So read each section as a logical proof. What's the socialist claim? State ownership eliminates exploitation. What's Mises' counterargument? Without prices, rational calculation is impossible. What evidence does he provide? Historical examples, logical deduction. What conclusion follows? Socialism must fail economically. Write these out. Seriously, the act of writing the logical structure forces you to understand the argument, not just read words. Also, when Mises discusses historical socialism, Russian Revolution, German social democracy, look up the actual history. Wikipedia is fine. You'll find that everything Mises predicted in 1922 actually happened. That confirmation is powerful. It shows you this is an ideology, it's accurate analysis. For human action, 900 pages, 6 to 12 months. Be patient. This is a marathon. Here's your strategy. Set a pace you can sustain indefinitely. Maybe 5 pages per day. That's 180 pages per month. You finish in 5 months. Or 3 pages per day. You finish in 10 months. Doesn't matter. What matters is consistency. Keep a concept journal. When Mises introduces a new term, praxeology, catalactics, time preference, write, Definition in Mises' words. Definition in your words. Real example you can picture. Here's why. Mises uses precise terminology. If you let terms blur together, you'll get lost. But if you nail down each concept as it's introduced, the later chapters build smoothly. Also, and this is crucial, don't skip the footnotes. Mises uses footnotes to address objections, provide historical context, and cite other scholars. Those footnotes are gold. They show you Mises engaging with critics, refining arguments, demonstrating erudition. One reading technique that works. After each chapter, summarize in one paragraph. What was the main principle Mises established? How did he prove it? What follows from it? This forces active reading. You can't summarize what you don't understand, and the summaries become your review guide. You can reread your 30-chapter summaries in an hour and recall the entire architecture of the book. Finally, join or create a reading group. Human action is dense enough that discussing it with others accelerates understanding. Even just one other person reading alongside you, sharing insights, asking questions, debating interpretations, makes the journey easier and richer. The timeline. If you start today with economic policy, spend 2 weeks. Add socialism at 3 months. Begin human action by month 4. By month 10 to 16, you've read all 3. 1 year, maybe 18 months. That's the path from economic confusion to Misesian mastery. Compare that to, for years of economics, undergrad learning Keynesian nonsense, or endless YouTube videos that give you fragmented ideas without systematic understanding. This is the efficient path. The one Mises himself would recommend. You ready to start? Look how far you've come in this video alone. 20 minutes ago, you were staring at Mises' bibliography feeling overwhelmed and paralyzed. Which book first? Where to start? Everyone giving different advice. Now, you know exactly what to do. You have the 3-book roadmap that takes you from accessible entry point to comprehensive mastery. Not the path designed for PhD candidates. The path designed for you, an intelligent person with limited time who needs to understand economic reality fast. You start with economic policy this weekend. 100 pages that give you the Misesian lens, the framework for seeing through political rhetoric and media nonsense. You finish in 2 weeks with the ability to analyze every policy proposal, every economic headline, every political promise with crystal clarity. Then socialism, the 500-page logical demolition of central planning that explains why capitalism works and socialism cannot. You spend 2 to 3 months absorbing the calculation argument, the sociological analysis, the historical vindication. You emerge with understanding so complete that no socialist promise can ever seduce you again. Finally, human action, the 900-page masterwork that systematically rebuilds all of economic science from the axiom of human action. You spend 6 to 12 months working through it carefully, concept by concept, chapter by chapter. And when you finish, you possess something extraordinarily rare: complete mastery of economic logic. That's the transformation these 3 books deliver. From confused to confident, from manipulated to sovereign, from drowning in economic chaos to standing on the firm ground of logical certainty. You'll never be the same. When politicians promise that raising minimum wage helps workers, you'll instantly see the unemployment it creates. When media blames inflation on greed, you'll recognize the monetary expansion that caused it. When activists demand rent control to help renters, you'll predict the housing shortage that follows. Not because you memorize Mises' positions, because you understand the logic, the principles that make these outcomes inevitable. That understanding is freedom, intellectual freedom, the freedom to think clearly in a world drowning in economic confusion. Starting today, you're going to do something different. You're going to stop consuming random economic content, YouTube videos, podcast snippets, Twitter threads that give you disconnected fragments without systematic understanding. Instead, you're committing to the 3-book path. This weekend, literally this Saturday morning, order Economic Policy, Thoughts for Today and Tomorrow, It's available on Amazon for $12. Mises Institute offers free PDF. Get it however works for you, but get it today. Then block out 4 hours this weekend. 2 hours Saturday, 2 hours Sunday. In that time, you'll read 50 pages each day. Monday morning, you wake up having finished the book. And here's what happens Monday. You read the news differently. When you see the headline, Biden announces new price controls to fight corporate greed, you won't feel confused or anxious. You'll think, Mises explained this. Price controls create shortages. I know exactly what happens next. That's power. That's what one weekend with one short book gives you. From there, the path is clear. Within a week of finishing economic policy, order socialism. Start your 15 to 20 pages per day. In 3 months, you're done. While reading socialism, order human action. When you finish socialism, you crack open a masterwork, already equipped with a foundation to receive it. 12 months from today, you're a different person intellectually. The confusion, gone. The anxiety about economic chaos, replaced with understanding. The vulnerability to political manipulation, eliminated. You'll look back at today as the day you stopped being economically illiterate, the day you chose Mises, the day you started the journey to intellectual sovereignty. Not someday, today, this weekend, with one 100-page book. There's a line from Mises I think about constantly. He wrote, "Economics must not be relegated to classrooms and statistical offices and must not be left to esoteric circles. It is a philosophy of human life and action and concerns everybody and everything. It is the pith of civilization and of man's human existence." Do you feel the weight of that? Economics isn't academic abstraction. It's the philosophy of human life. It concerns your job, your savings, your children's future, the survival of civilization itself. And right now, at this moment in history, economic illiteracy is destroying everything. Politicians print unlimited money while blaming inflation on greed. They impose price controls while shocked that shortages emerge. They regulate industries into dysfunction while demanding more regulation to fix the problems regulation created. This madness continues because most people don't understand economics. They're confused, manipulated, powerless. But you're different. You're here because you want to understand. You want intellectual sovereignty. You want the clarity that lets you protect your family, make wise decisions, see through the lies. Mises gave you the tools. 3 books, a 12-month path, complete mastery of economic logic. All you have to do is start. This channel exists to guide you through exactly this journey. Mises, Hayek, Rothbard, Sowell, the thinkers who actually explain reality instead of serving political narratives. Subscribe if you're serious about this transformation. Next video, we're diving into Mises' business cycle theory and why it predicted 2008, while Bernanke saw nothing coming. Order economic policy today. Read it this weekend. Comment below when you finish. I want to hear about your first aha moment with Mises. See you in the next one. And meanwhile, may clarity set you free.